And we are live.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I have taken the attendance and we have all 6 of our members present. We're going to start off with our elections. So are there any nominations for chair? Councillor Carpenter?
Yes, I would like to nominate Councillor Utley for chair. He's currently the vice chair.
Okay, Councillor Utley, do you accept the nomination?
With pleasure. Thank you, Councillor.
Are there any other nominations for chair? Okay, seeing none, Councillor Utley, you are acclaimed as chair. Are there any nominations for vice chair? Councillor Carpenter?
I know I'm pretty quick. I'd like to nominate Councillor Van Tilburg, and if he doesn't accept, then I'd like to nominate Councillor Sokoli.
Okay, Councillor Van Tilburg, do you accept the nomination?
I will accept.
Okay, are there any other nominations for vice chair? Seeing none, Councillor Van Tilburg, you are acclaimed as vice chair. We normally require chairs to be in the chambers just so they have access to the system. So just bear with us today as we try and navigate the speakers list for Councillor Utley. So if you want to get started.
Can I make a suggestion that for this meeting, past chair Martin chair this meeting, and I'll come into chambers from this time on, if that's satisfactory to everyone.
Okay, is that satisfactory to the vice chair as well? Councillor Van Tilburg?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Perfect. We're just going to get Councillor Martin set up if you just give us a couple seconds. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And congratulations, Councillor Van Tilburg. I saw my first robin today. Good sign of spring.
I would take myself off mute, but the dog is snoring over here. So, but it feels like springish this week, doesn't it?
Sure does.
Is it a spring snore?
He's so loud. I just interrupted his sleep.
There it is. While I'm waiting for the, oh, it didn't like my password. I'd like to remind members of committee, staff, and our viewing public of the electronic participation policy for virtual meetings. Staff and delegates are reminded to keep their video and microphones off until requested by the moderator or members of the committee. All rules for delegations under the city's procedure bylaw continue to apply. Further, in the event of a connection service interruption occurs that affects quorum, we may recess the meeting for up to 15 minutes to regain quorum. If quorum is not achieved, the meeting will be adjourned. The full corporate policy 50 regarding electronic virtual participation in meetings is available online for review. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Councillor Carpenter?
Yes, I have a conflict of interest with item 5.1, St. Joseph Life Care. My daughter-in-law is an employee there, so I will not take part in the presentation or any discussion of a resolution developed from that. And I've already submitted my form. Thank you.
Okay, the sound isn't very good in here. Is everybody else hearing the?
Can hear you fine.
Your password should be on here. I had the username wrong. There was an extra letter in there. Okay, my fat fingers hit too many keys. Okay, are there any items that for consideration or consent that people wish to separate for discussion purposes? Councillor Van Tilburg.
Yes, I'd like to separate the capital projects update 6-1.
Calendar. Okay.
Sorry, just bear with us. We're just navigating a couple tech issues.
Just about there. Okay. Okay, so we have one separation. And please have a mover and a seconder for all items for consideration and consent not separated for discussion purposes.
Mr. Chair, Councillor Cobb has his hand raised.
Yeah, 6.22, if we could separate that, I have one question, and I'm happy to move all items for consideration.
Okay. So 6.1.1 and 6.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I realize you had some technical problems there and it's been difficult to recognize the only person that's here with you. 6.2.5, that could be separated, the quarterly casino update, please.
6.2.5, okay. And sorry, Councilor Carpenter, which one was that again? You're muted. 6.2.2.
6.2.2.
Okay, and it's moved by Councilor Carpenter, seconded by Mayor Davis. Seeing no further separation, questions, comments, we'll call the vote.
Just for clarification, the item subject to the vote are as follows. Item 6.2.1, financing lease policy, establish non-material lease categories for 2022. Item 6.2.4, quarterly status report of contracts awarded, and 6.2.6, the minutes. Just waiting for your vote, Mayor Davis. All items not separated carry unanimously on our recorded vote. Those voting in favor, Councillor Martin, Mayor Davis, Councillor Sokoli, Councillor Utley, Councillor Carpenter, and Councillor Van Tilburg.
Okay, we have one presentation for today. I'll ask Julia Powell and David Warmold to come forward to provide a presentation regarding funding consideration for St. Joseph's Life Care Center. This presentation is being made today in accordance with section 15.6.3 of the city's procedural bylaw. Please state your names and address. You have 10 minutes inclusive of questions from the committee.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? It's Julie Powell. So Julie Powell, my address is 35 Franklin Street, Brantford. So good afternoon. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Julie Powell, and I'm the president and CEO of St. Joseph's Life Care Foundation. Our foundation raises funds in the community to support St. Joseph's Life Care Center Campus of Care, which includes our long-term care home, as well as Stedman Community Hospice. And joining me is David Warmold, and David is the president of our Campus of Care. Tonight, we are respectfully asking the City of Brantford to consider funding support. Next slide. I'm going to be speaking to you about our request for funding for the hospice, and David will share the request for long-term care. Stedman Community Hospice provides around-the-clock end-of-life care for patients within our 10-bed residential hospice. The hospice is located in Brantford and cares for residents in the city, as well as the county and surrounding community, including Six Nations. Stedman is the only hospice in our city, county, and surrounding area. We also provide care in the community through our community outreach program, and outreach is for patients who would prefer to spend their final days at home. With outreach, a team of allied professionals, including nurses and doctors, go into the homes of patients to manage pain and symptoms at the bedside. Next slide. So a few important numbers to share with you, and I'm really just going to focus on 3 of these this evening. 67% of our patients are from within the city of Brantford. 970 families are supported through outreach, and this number grew substantially throughout the pandemic. And finally, 29% of patients in hospice are under 65 years of age. A year ago, this number was 22%. Next slide. Just a few facts about hospice. Hospice care doesn't just start when a patient moves into our hospice. The care starts well before admission and continues with families after their loved one has died. No family ever gets a bill for their care at hospice. The provincial government does not fund all of hospice care. The cost per year to operate the hospice is $3.1 million. $1.2 million is raised in the community. Hospice care is 1/3 the cost of hospital care. The hospice partners with local healthcare organizations, including the hospital, and hospice care benefits the entire community. Next slide. So when our community supports hospice, what do the donations fund? So just a few examples, items such as new beds and patient lifts, housekeeping and laundry, insurance and groceries, utilities, as well as maintaining our beautiful gardens, and of course, frontline nursing care and grief and bereavement support. Next slide. So we have a very brief video that we wanted to show you about one family's experience with hospice.
I'm Joyce Kalea's daughter. My mom passed away in hospice October 22nd, 2020. They told her in February that she would not be here in a year. She always spoke about coming to hospice. Because she had 2 brothers that passed, they received end-of-life care here, and she was passionate about this place. A lot of her fundraising was for hospice. I didn't have to worry once she came here about medication or pain management or even personal care. And my whole family got to come, and socially distanced. We got to sit around, and as soon as my kids were in arm's reach, she sat up, she opened her eyes, she grabbed for them, she spoke, she said, "Don't ever forget how much I love you." She saw everyone. Actually, one of the nurses here encouraged me to get in bed with her. She said, maybe she just needs you to get in there. It was so good to just be able to, lay there. And it was a memory that, one of my last memories of her really being awake. And that's an image I have that's it's great.
Next slide. I realize it's been a challenging 2 years for all of us. The need for end-of-life care at the hospice never slowed down during COVID, but the community's ability to support the hospice did. We have been severely impacted throughout the pandemic with regards to donations. I am respectfully asking the City of Brantford to consider providing funding in the same capacity as the county recently did, in the way of providing $100,000 to support the residential and outreach programs at Stedman Hospice. These funds will directly impact patients and their families' care through nursing care, bereavement support, both in homes and in the hospice. I'm going to turn the floor over to David now to speak to long-term care.
Thank you, Julie. Next slide, please. Good evening, Mayor Davis and members of the Finance Committee. My name is David Wormold. My home address is 55 Highland Crescent in Cambridge. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. Next slide. I think it's fair to say that we've been through some rapid change and uncertain times that have left our people feeling quite stretched, strained, and exhausted. And as this wave of the pandemic recedes, it's going to be vitally important to support our people to find the path to resilience. A focus on integrating resilient strategies and fostering staff wellness at all levels of the organization are going to be key, and they'll set us apart from other healthcare work environments. The strength and mental resilience of our dedicated care teams at the core of our ability to provide intensive and personalized care to those that we serve. And many healthcare providers came into COVID-19 pandemic already depleted, and the last 24 months of rapid change, uncertainty, and the immense pressure of keeping their patients, residents, and themselves safe have left them strained and exhausted. And the pandemic has amplified the sources of emotional distress and provider burnout. A national survey of healthcare workers conducted in the latter part of 2021 was undertaken to characterize the psychological and functional outcomes among healthcare workers during the pandemic and identify the associated events and workplace factors. And they found that 1 in 4 healthcare workers surveyed across Canada meet the criteria for a probable diagnosis of PTSD. 7 in 10 healthcare workers surveyed across Canada report feeling numb or detached from their people, from their activities, or from their surrounding. And as the pandemic recedes, healthcare is predicting crisis-level staffing shortages due in part to caregiver fatigue and emotional exhaustion. In fact, 50% of healthcare workers are considering leaving their profession due to moral distress. So retaining and growing a resilient workforce is going to be critical to our mission and our future ability to care for the community we serve. Next slide. So on the left-hand side, you'll see that these blue areas are stressors that are a part of any workplace, whether it's a bank, retail, or a tech company. And these are the stressors that come from the workplace itself, the policy, structures, work conditions that contribute to one's experience of stress. On the right, or in the orange, are the additional stressors that come from those we serve in healthcare. Residents and families interacting with the healthcare system, for the most part, are suffering and struggling in some way as a result of staff and physicians who are exposed to suffering and the loss on a daily basis. And the emotional labor of healthcare workers involves managing the emotional demands of relating with residents and their families as they deal with difficult situations. Healthcare workers use emotional labor to create and cultivate bonds with those in their care, especially when they wish to reduce a person's anxiety or their need to perform an unpleasant procedure. And in fact, emotional labor is often cited as a core component of a care provider's role in making patients feel safe and comfortable. But the need to hide their own emotions can also be fully present for those in their care, regardless of the circumstances. And resilience can be a protective process against the negative effects of emotional labor. So building resilience in our nurses, PSWs, physicians, our entire team of care workers is an important strategy. And at St. Joe's, we recognize the inherent occupational impact of doing high stress, trauma exposed work. And we believe a person's resilience must be supported organizationally through sustainable training, support, and development. Next slide. So to that end, we're requesting $70,000 to develop a Center for Resilience, Learning, and Growth. And this generous support will help provide the funding needed to purchase in-person and virtual training and development, the programming, coaching, and a host of other resources to create an integrated and sustainable culture of resilience, compassion, learning, and our growth. Our intention is to develop this integrated approach resilience at all levels of the organization. And in order to build the resilient workforce, we not only need to address it at the individual level, but from the team and from the organizational. So we want to take a systems approach to building a resilient, healthy, and compassionate workforce and delivering quality care to our residents. This funding would not only support St. Joseph's workforce, but we see this as an opportunity to spread this work with our Brantford Brant OHT community partners. We see that by doing this, it benefits and strengthens all of our healthcare providers and also provides integrated mental health and well-being strategies. Next slide.
If you could wrap it up, you've gone over your time.
So I'm just respectfully asking the city of Brantford to consider providing funding in the same capacity as the county recently did in the way of providing $70,000 to support the long-term care and the hospice request. Thank you.
Okay, and you've gone over your time, so we don't have any time for questions. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I have a mover and a seconder to put separated items on the floor? Councillor Utley, second by Mayor Davis. Councillor Van Tilburg, I believe you separated the first item, 6.1.1.
Yes, it did.
Go ahead, floor is yours.
Or are we not going to the item that was presented to us first? Well, the delegates are here.
They made a presentation, but not to anything that's on the agenda.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought we were dealing with that. No problem. Now I'm not asking questions is a little. I was concerned about that presentation for 107,000, and then we couldn't even ask any questions. But that's cool. Yes, I do. I have a question regarding the Ava Bridge, the CNR Ava Bridge. Do we own that bridge?
Through the chair, I would have to double check for you. I'll have to check with design and construction and get back to you.
Because with other bridges that I've encountered, the city's not been able to do anything with them when we see stuff, and they say, well, we can't do anything. That bridge belongs to the railway company. Pardon me?
Sorry, through the chair, it is my assumption that we would own that structure.
Yeah, and that's what I'm assuming too. I'm just wondering what differentiates between who owns a bridge going over a railway. In other words, they do own some of those bridges. And if there's a way to verify perhaps that they have a stake in the game, maybe not all this expenditure is on us.
So over any CNR rail, most of the structures belong to the city. There are some, if it is the structure is for the purpose of the rail, is going to be a structure that's owned by CNR. We do have components of the bridge that we have to maintain and look after. A lot of the bridges that do cross over the 403, depending on the agreement, are owned by the MTO, and we do have responsibility for maintenance.
Okay. The other question I have is regarding the Colburn Street slope. Is that work to be completed this year?
No, through the chair, Colburn Street slope. So for 2022, the work that's planned is to finish off any preliminary studies and move into detailed design. I believe phase 1 of construction, which would include stabilizing the slope through rock fingers and toe protection and drainage improvements. That may be carried into 2023. Depending on the slope monitoring program, phase 2 might not happen until 2024.
So the 231,000 is literally observation and study?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
Mayor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to staff. So you've given us the list of the capital projects that will pay, at least in part, with these funds coming to us through the OSIF program. What were the criteria that you used to determine which projects would be included on this list and which you wouldn't use these funds for?
Yes, through the chair. So the OSIF funding is to help support small, rural, and northern communities. We received for 2022 roughly $6.8 million. That money has to be used up in 5 years. So we decided that the eligible projects, number one, it has to meet the eligibility rules, which is the funding is for critical pieces of infrastructure. That would be roads, bridges, linear infrastructure, and storm facilities. We decided that a project to be eligible would be something that would be in detailed design or going into detailed design for 2022 and construction for 2023, so that we can meet that 5-year requirement. We also wanted to put projects forth that were using the capital envelope or the capital levy, so that money can be returned to those reserves and reallocated to other capital works.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a great segue. So what are the other capital works that when will council make the decision on what other capital works should move forward that have already been approved in the capital budget that now will be funded by some of this funding?
Through the chair, sorry, Councilor Carpenter, can you repeat that?
Yeah, no, this is funding for capital works from the capital works budget. So what other projects in the capital work budget will we now be able to council have, or at least the finance committee or council have some say in what moves forward to replace these funds that are now funding these projects? You said it's going back to reserves, so that would allow it for other capital projects. When will council have a say on those capital projects?
Yes, so that would be through the normal capital budgeting process and estimates committee.
So that would move forward to next year?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Am I still on? Oh,
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, sorry, I was trying to jump in there. Yeah, just thanks, Mike. So just through you, Mr. Chair, just to confirm that, yes, those funds will just remain in the reserves until staff comes back to council, likely through the estimates committee, to confirm the spending of those monies on new capital projects.
Okay, seeing no other questions, I have one. The report says that there's 765,000 that are being allocated to the reserve. Why was the Coburn Street slope stabilization not funded further so that there was nothing left over this year?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I do believe that those monies were set aside just for this purpose, and that 231,000 is the remaining balance in that reserve that was established for this purpose. So we're just going to clear that off, and so that we can direct those monies towards this very specific project. And it would allow more of the OSIF funding that we're allocating to these other projects to be returned to the levy or to the capital funding envelope reserve, where they would be available to fund really any corporate-wide tax-supported project.
Okay, but is there a reason why the Coburn Street funding was not maxed out for this year? Was it not fully eligible, or what's the?
I might not be understanding the question. So there's two funding sources that were approved for 2022 for that Coburn Street slope stabilization project. One funding source was the reserve that only has this small balance left in it. And then we were accessing the capital funding envelope reserve for the remainder. So now what this report is going to do is substitute the OSIF money for the capital funding envelope money only. And that money is going to go back to the capital funding envelope reserve, which is not project specific and can be used for any tax supported project.
I don't know if there's a mistake in this report or if I'm just not understanding it properly, but it says that there's 4.7 million being taken from the capital funding envelope from 2022 for Coburn Street. And then later it says that only 2.5 million is being utilized from this fund. Why was that number not higher? Oh, your mic was still on.
Sorry, I do see what you are saying now, and I may need to defer this to Judy or Mike to discuss. But the remaining 765,000 is being allocated to the Dobney project, that does have costs that carry forward to 2023. So we have allocated all the OSIF funding the best we can to 2022. And then that small extra portion that we're carrying forward to 2023 is to fund the Daubney project in 2023. Is that correct?
Okay, so enough is retained to finish off that project.
Correct.
Okay, now it makes sense. Seeing no further questions, we'll call the vote.
Item 6.1.1, capital project updates carries unanimously on a recorded vote. Those voting in favor, Councillor Martin, Mayor Davis, Councillor Secoli, Councillor Utley, Councillor Carpenter, and Councillor Van Tilburg.
Okay, 6.2.2, honorary and expense report. Councillor Carpenter.
And just a quick one, Mr. Chair. We only have one member of the Police Services Board honorarium on here. Why do we not have all of them on here?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the two members that are council members don't retain their honorarium. So those funds remain within the city. So they don't go to those councillors. And then the other two members are provincial appointees. And the municipality is not responsible for reporting the remuneration paid to the members that are appointed by the province.
Okay, that explains it. Thank you.
So the municipality still pays those, but it's not part of the reporting structure. Any other questions on this item? Seeing none, we'll call the vote.
Item 6.2.2, honorary and expense report carries unanimously on a recorded vote. Those voting in favor, Councillor Martin, Mayor Davis, Councillor Secoli, Councillor Utley, Councillor Carpenter, and Councillor Van Tilburg.
Okay, brings us 6.2.5, quarterly casino update. Mayor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I ask staff to share page 49 of 55 of the report? It's a very good summary of casino receipts estimated and what will likely be paid out this year. So my questions arise out of that analysis. So can't. Sorry, I should have told you beforehand I was going to do this, but I wanted to do this. Hope my time's not ticking, Mr. Chair. Great, thank you very much. So I guess these questions would go through you, Mr. Chair. I think probably to Joelle. So you're estimating the receipts this year to be $3,500,000, and typically in the past, before the pandemic, it was about $5,500,000.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. We budgeted $5 million annually.
Right, but the couple of years prior to the pandemic, we were tracking at more than that, almost close to $6 million, right?
Correct. There was years where we were as high as 6 million. And then it did start to decline before the pandemic once the table gaming activities were introduced at some of the horse racing casinos. So Flamborough and the one in Toronto. So we did start to see a decline prior to pandemic, down to about 5.5 million. We still didn't think we saw the full impact of that, but then the pandemic hit.
Right. Now, did you consider in predicting 3.5 million for this year that as of April 1st, online gaming will be permitted in Ontario, which will likely have some impact upon what they call the bricks and mortar casinos?
Yeah, certainly we know that that's something that's coming. And again, we don't exactly know what the impacts of that is going to be. We do know that for the last 2 quarters, when the casino was experiencing capacity issues or closures for each of the last 2 quarters, that we did see almost $900,000 in revenue in each of those quarters. So just extrapolating that out, 3.6 million, we did expect that once they're back at full capacity beginning this quarter, that we might see some increase in those revenues for the remaining quarters of this year, but did bring it back down to 3.5, recognizing that there was going to likely be some impact of the online gaming.
Right. So, Mr. Chair, I mean, this graph, this analysis tells us an interesting story. First of all, the reduction in receipts during the pandemic, the 2 years of the pandemic, is about $7 million less over 2 years than what we normally would have received. And you're seeing that in the very bottom number, the forecasting ending balance. What really drives my concern, Mr. Chair, which tells me next year there'll be some hard decisions to make, is so the revenue is $3,500,000, and the items you see in that green column going down to which are the approved commitments, which are really the most essential commitments out of that money. You know, the Y Laurier contribution, the boundary compensation, the commitment to the Brantford community healthcare system. You know, that totals about, all those items total 4.1 million. And that's not even doing the 700,000 we normally do to the foundation, $700,000 transfer to capital. If you add those in, you get up to about 4,700,000. So that's why you see this year we're spending 5.262 million. We only have 3,500,000 coming in, and that's where the ending balance money's holding in reserve. It's declining precipitously from 1 year to the next by about, just shy of $2 million. So what this tells me is we're okay this coming year, but and probably okay for next year, maybe, with this, let's call it this lean menu of funds we're spending, which is not quite the same as what it was. But clearly the next council is going to have some hard decisions to make if the casino revenues track at 3 million or 3,500,000. I know I'm kind of stating the obvious, but it's an important source of funds, not necessarily to fund city programs, but a lot of these are outside programs and capital projects. So and some being absolutely critical to our financial well-being, the boundary compensation, the why. So some hard decisions to be made, but let's hope that the casino revenues will come up, but no guarantee of that.
Okay, Councilor Carpenter.
Yes, can staff tell us about 2020? When do some of these commitments fall off the list?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So when we're looking at 2022 and what those commitments are, you're right, a lot of them are sort of annual in nature, but do have an end date. The 2022 is the final commitment for the ER redevelopment project at the hospital. So that $467,000 number will not continue into 2023. That'll be complete. The boundary compensation, I believe that goes until 2028. I'm looking at Pat to maybe nod. 2027. The Y Laurier complex, I believe, continues until 2025. Going down the list, all the other items, the 2,500, the 110,000, the 152, 470, the 217,000, and the 5,000, they're all annual commitments with no approved end date as of yet. The Year of the Garden was just a one-time unmet need approved through this estimates process. The city grants program is expected to continue in some form. And then the remainder are really contributions to our own internal programs. So they will continue unless there's a decision by council to not continue those.
Okay, and yeah, we won't know exactly what the impact of the online gaming will be. It's something that we've been against for a long time. It's a dangerous thing to be doing, but I guess the province sees money in it, as does every province. The $700,000 for transfer to capital. Now, we just moved a whole bunch of money to capital, right, for the future. So we've got some room there as well. We just moved some millions, $4 million to capital, to the capital reserve.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I see Brian.
Maybe you and I wasn't sure if we can answer this. I mean, Councilor Carver, through Mr. Chair, Brian Hutchings, CEO. Yes, I mean, the $7 million is going to help us immensely, and it's going to relieve some of that 700,000. To your immediate question, Councilor Carver. The longer term question is, we did an asset study just of not our facilities, but just the public works. And we're $21 million short a year. We've been plugging that out of reserves and what have you. So it is a longer term game problem, but right now, short term, the $7 million is definitely going to help us over the next few years.
Yeah, I guess we look at that though. We're talking about priorities. I mean, whether we spend it on luxury items or we spend it on the need items. I mean, I don't ask someone to add a garage to their house when the roof's leaking. The roof's the priority. So I guess it's a matter of council priorities, what gets fixed, and that's why the capital budget doesn't have so many roads being fixed. But I agree with the mayor. We'll have to review this. And my concern has always been with the casino funding is that the city should never become dependent on casino revenue. Casino revenue is always supposed to be for X. Originally, it was for mental health, addiction, and policing services. And I think if we had kept it there, we probably wouldn't have the problems we have in our downtown core today. But we didn't. We got kind of excited about special projects, and we've still got special projects here. But yeah, I agree with the mayor. It'll have to be reviewed in its entirety. We should make sure that we don't put it in places that where we become dependent on gaming revenue. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, I just have a few comments. Yeah, the pandemic has shown us that we can't rely on casino revenues because it is somewhat fickle and could dry up at any time. And as was said earlier, we don't know what the impacts will be of online gaming. So I think staff have taken a very prudent approach by forecasting 3.5 million. That allows us to continue to meet all our obligations this year and probably for several years to come, because that number is likely to go up once the casino is fully open and operating for a full year again. And as was mentioned, some of the big ticket items will drop off. It's the final year for the ER redevelopment. So that's almost $500,000 that'll drop off that annual amount. And the ones at the bottom are all at council's discretion. We can reduce those as necessary if the funding becomes inadequate for other things until some of the long-term ones drop off. Seeing no further questions or comments, we'll call the question.
Item 6.2.5 quarterly casino update carries unanimously on a recorded vote. Those voting in favor, Councillor Martin, Mayor Davis, Councillor Sokoli, Councillor Utley, Councillor Carpenter, and Councillor Van Tilburg.
Okay, we have no resolutions on the agenda for today's meeting.
Mr. Chair, if I may, with the presentation that we had this evening, there was no notice of motion. And I think if we wait until our next meeting to introduce a notice of motion, that's going to lengthen an answer that I'd like us to get back to St. Joe's with. I'm sure they're eager to start some. So I know this is out of order, but I just wanted to give advance notice that I'll be in the chair at the next meeting, but I may need someone to introduce a notice of motion and a motion to waive rules for a resolution to be introduced for debate around St. Joe's request. So I just want to give everybody a heads up on that, and trying to be respectful to St. Joe's as well, in helping them through the struggles that they're experiencing and have experienced with COVID. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so with that verbal notice of motion, that's the only notice of motion we have. Meeting is now adjourned, and I apologize for the slow start with the